What if I told you that some of the most powerful medicines you could possibly use are not locked up in pharmacies hidden behind prescription counters or buried in expensive supplements, but growing wild in ditches, abandoned lots, fence lines, wet meadows, and maybe even your own backyard? Plants our grandparents knew by heart. Plants soldiers trusted on battlefields. Plants families relied on for centuries before there were hospitals on every corner. Most people do not realize this, but while we are all running to the drugstore for every cut, cough, ache, burn, bite, and sore throat, there are medicinal plants all around us that have been helping human beings heal for thousands of years. And modern science is finally starting to catch up. Today I am going to show you 20 forgotten medicinal plants that can completely change the way you think about natural healing. Stick around because number 17 on this list has been used for over 2,000 years, and modern research now shows it works against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And number 20 is so powerful it was literally the original aspirin before aspirin even existed. And it may be growing in a ditch near you right now. So hit that subscribe button because we post videos every single week that help you save money, reconnect with real healing knowledge, and take more control of your health. Let's get into it. Here are 20 forgotten medicinal plants that will heal you instantly, ranked from impressive to absolutely incredible. 1. Plantain weed, the trailside first aid kit. Let's start with one that almost everybody has seen, stepped on or pulled out of the ground without realizing what it was. Plantain weed, not the banana-like fruit, but the common low-growing weed with oval leaves and thin seed spikes, is one of the best first aid plants on earth. It grows in lawns, sidewalks, trails, pastures, disturbed soil, practically anywhere people go. And for generations it was used for cuts, burns, bee stings, insect bites, splinters, irritation, swelling, and minor infections. Native peoples and early settlers alike learned to use it because it worked fast, and it was always there. Modern research backs that up. Studies show plantain has real wound-healing, anti-inflammatory, and antimicrobial effects. It helps calm tissue, reduce pain, and support repair. Traditional use was beautifully simple. You crush a fresh leaf, or chew it briefly to break it down, and place it right on the bite, sting, or cut. Within minutes, pain and swelling often start going down. Plantain got ignored because it is too common, too ordinary, too easy. We have been trained to believe medicine should come in a bottle, not grow under our shoes. But for quick, practical, everyday first aid, plantain is still one of the most useful plants in the world. It is the medicine at your feet that most people never notice. 1. Plantain weed, the trailside first aid kit. Let's start with one that almost everybody has seen, stepped on, or pulled out of the ground without realizing what it was. Plantain weed, not the banana-like fruit, but the common low-growing weed with oval leaves and thin seed spikes, is one of the best first aid plants on earth. It grows in lawns, sidewalks, trails, pastures, disturbed soil, practically anywhere people go. And for generations it was used for cuts, burns, bee stings, insect bites, splinters, irritation, swelling, and minor infections. Native peoples and early settlers alike learned to use it because it worked fast, and it was always there. Modern research backs that up. Studies show plantain has real wound-healing, anti-inflammatory, and antimicrobial effects. It helps calm tissue, reduce pain, and support repair. Traditional use was beautifully simple. You crush a fresh leaf, or chew it briefly to break it down, and place it right on the bite, sting, or cut. Within minutes, pain and swelling often start going down. Plantain got ignored because it is too common, too ordinary, too easy. We have been trained to believe medicine should come in a bottle, not grow under our shoes. But for quick, practical, everyday first aid, plantain is still one of the most useful plants in the world. It is the medicine at your feet that most people never notice. 3. Calendula, the warflower. Calendula looks cheerful, soft, decorative. But do not let the bright orange petals fool you. This flower has one of the toughest reputations in traditional medicine. Medieval soldiers carried calendula for wound care on battlefields. It was used on cuts, burns, scrapes, inflamed skin, and damaged tissue because even before antibiotics, people knew this flower helped wounds heal cleaner and faster. Modern clinical trials support that reputation. Calendula extracts have shown benefits for wound healing, burns, inflammation, and tissue repair. That is because the flowers are loaded with compounds like triterpenoids and flavonoids compounds with real antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory activity. A simple infused calendula oil or salve can still be one of the best things you keep around for minor skin injuries. And yet it got pushed aside because once again, no one can patent a flower. Calendula is still here, still easy to grow, still effective, still doing exactly what made people trust it centuries ago. It is one of the prettiest emergency medicines you will ever meet. 4. Comfrey the bone knitter. Now we move into one of the most legendary healing plants ever used for injury recovery. Comfrey. Its old folk name was knitbone, and that tells you everything you need to know about how deeply people trusted it. For generations, comfrey was used externally for bruises, sprains, pulled muscles, swelling, abrasions, and damaged tissue. People believed it sped healing dramatically. Modern studies suggest they were right. Comfrey contains allantoin, a compound associated with cell proliferation and tissue repair. Clinical trials have shown topical comfrey root extracts can reduce pain and improve recovery in back pain, ankle sprains, abrasions, and osteoarthritis. Now, very important, comfrey is for external use only. Internal use is not recommended because of liver-toxic compounds in the plant, but used correctly on the outside of the body, it remains one of the most respected trauma herbs in natural medicine. Comfrey got forgotten, partly because of confusion around safe use, and partly because modern systems split healing into categories: X-rays for bones, prescriptions for pain creams for skin, physical therapy for tissue. Comfrey belongs to an older way of thinking. One plant, one body, help it repair. It is the plant that tells your body to start knitting itself back together. 5. Self-heal the plant that named itself. Some medicinal plants earned beautiful names. This one earned the boldest name possible: self-heal. Heal all. That confidence did not come from marketing, it came from experience. Self-heal was used on wounds, sore throats, mouth ulcers, inflamed tissue, and a wide range of minor infections. People trusted it enough to name it after the thing they saw it do. And modern research is beginning to justify that reputation, especially around wound healing, inflammation, and even bacterial biofilms. That last part matters. Biofilms are one reason certain infections can be hard to clear. Traditionally, self-heal was used as a gargle, a tea, or a crushed fresh poultice. It is especially loved for mouth and throat tissue, the kind of places where it is hard to treat pain directly. It grows low in grass and meadows often overlooked, sending up purple flower spikes that bees love. Like many of the plants on this list, it disappeared, not because it stopped working, but because it was too common to monetize. Self-heal is one of those plants that makes you wonder how much medicine we stopped seeing just because it was growing for free. 6. Mullein the lung cleaner. If you have ever seen a tall stalk with soft, fuzzy leaves growing in a vacant lot or along the roadside, you may have been looking at mullein. And for generations, mullein was one of the go-to plants for the lungs. Coughs, chest congestion, bronchitis, thick mucus, lingering respiratory irritation. People used mullein because it helped the lungs do what they were already trying to do: clear the junk out. Its leaves contain compounds that help loosen mucus and support expectoration. Modern reviews also suggest anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial effects in the respiratory system. Traditionally, mullein tea was made from the dried leaves, strained carefully to remove the tiny irritating hairs, and used for wet coughs and chest colds. Its flowers were also infused in oil for ear complaints. Mullein got pushed aside by cough syrups and decongestants, but those often just shut down the symptom instead of helping the lungs clear themselves. Mullein works with the body, and that is why it earned such a lasting reputation. It is not just a cough herb, it is a lung herb. 7. White horehound, the original cough drop. Before store-bought cough drops, there was horehound candy. That tells you how trusted this plant once was. White horehound became famous for productive coughs, the kind where mucus is stuck and needs to move. It was used for bronchitis, chest congestion, and stubborn, wet coughs that just would not clear. Its active compounds help stimulate bronchial secretions, making the cough more productive instead of just suppressing it. That is the key difference. Horehound does not simply shut the cough off, it helps the body finish the job. For generations, people made strong horehound tea sweetened with honey or boiled it down into lozenges and candy. Then synthetic cough medicines came along and one more powerful old remedy got shoved into the background. But horehound is still worth remembering because real healing is not always about silencing symptoms. Sometimes it is about helping the body clear what is making it sick. And that is exactly what horehound was built for. 8. Agrimony, the throat soother. Agrimony is one of those herbs that older herbal traditions absolutely loved, especially for the throat, mouth, and digestive tract. It contains tannins which give it natural astringent properties, meaning it helps tighten tone and calm irritated tissue. That made it a classic gargle for sore throats, irritated mouths, post-nasal drip, and inflamed throat tissue. It was also used as a tea for mild digestive upset and diarrhea, where that same tissue-toning action could be helpful. The plant itself is understated tall stems, tiny yellow flowers, a wild meadow plant that does not look like much unless you know what you are looking at. But like many quiet medicinal plants, it earned a strong reputation because it solved a very common problem. Agrimony got forgotten because people stopped making gargles, stopped learning wild plants, and got used to reaching for stronger commercial products for every little thing. But for mild throat irritation, it still makes a lot of sense. It is like a healing throat rinse growing at the edge of the woods. 9. Boneset, the flu fighter. Now we are getting into the serious old-time remedies. Boneset was legendary in the 1800s for flu-like illness. So legendary that many homes kept it on hand the way people today keep cold medicine. It was used at the first sign of fever chills, deep aches, exhaustion, and that awful "my whole body hurts" feeling that comes with influenza-like sickness. In fact, the name boneset is connected to breakbone fever, the crushing aches that made people feel like their bones were splitting. The tea is famous for being intensely bitter, not mildly bitter, brutally bitter. But traditional users believed that bitterness was part of the medicine. Boneset was taken hot early and with intention, often followed by bed rest and sweating through the illness. Modern clinical evidence is not as strong here as with some other plants on this list, but ethnobotanical tradition around boneset is extremely deep. It got forgotten because we moved toward pharmaceuticals, antivirals, and symptom-specific treatment. But in the history of North American herbal medicine, boneset was one of the big ones. It is the plant people reached for when sickness hit hard. 10. Blue vervain, the nerve soother. Not every forgotten medicinal plant is for wounds or lungs. Some were for what modern life destroys most consistently, the nervous system. Blue vervain was traditionally used for tension, nervous exhaustion, headaches, stress, irritability, and trouble sleeping. In other words, exactly the kind of problems millions of people are walking around with now. Herbalists described vervain as a remedy for the person who is too tightly wound, thinking too much, holding too much tension, unable to downshift. Modern herbal use and some preliminary research point toward calming nervous system supportive effects. It is not a knockout herb. It is not a blunt sedative. It is more like a plant that helps the body remember how to unclench. That is why vervain matters, because not all healing is dramatic. Sometimes healing is finally being able to exhale. 11. Red clover, the field medicine flower. Red clover is so common that most people assume it could not possibly be important. And that assumption is exactly why it belongs on this list. For generations, red clover was used for chronic inflammation, skin conditions, and women's health, especially around the transitions of midlife. Modern research has looked especially at its isoflavones and their relationship to menopausal symptoms, such as hot flashes. Traditionally, it was also used over time not as an emergency fix, but as a steady nourishing plant for long-term support. That is what makes red clover different from the dramatic wound herbs and cough herbs. It works like a field medicine. Quietly, gradually, reliably. It does not shout. It carpets the land and keeps helping anyway. 12. Yellow dock, the digestion and liver aloe. Old herbalists used to call certain plants blood purifiers. What they often meant by that was simpler and more practical than it sounds. Plants that help the body digest, eliminate, and process waste better. Yellow dock was one of those. Its root was used for sluggish digestion, constipation, poor elimination, and certain chronic skin issues that seemed tied to what was going on internally. The bitterness of yellow dock is part of its action. Bitter roots stimulate digestive response. They wake things up. Modern evidence here is more traditional and preclinical than clinical, but the pattern is consistent digestion, liver support, bowel movement, internal cleanup. Yellow dock is not glamorous. It is not trendy. It is not exciting on camera. But it belongs to a whole class of old remedies built around a simple idea. Sometimes the skin clears when the gut starts working better. Yellow dock is the weed that reminds the body how to do housekeeping. 13. Oregon grape, the skin healer. Now we come to one of the most clinically interesting plants on the list. Oregon grape. This spiky evergreen shrub contains berberine and related alkaloids that have gained real respect for antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory effects. And unlike some herbs that are mostly famous through folklore, Oregon grape has actual clinical support behind its use for chronic skin issues like psoriasis and atopic dermatitis. That matters, because those are frustrating conditions, chronic, inflamed, persistent, difficult to manage. Traditional herbalists used Oregon grape for both skin and digestion, but modern interest has especially centered on its topical use. This is one of those plants where old knowledge and modern dermatology quietly start shaking hands. It got forgotten mostly because it grows regionally and was not widely known outside certain areas. But for chronic inflamed skin, this one deserves way more attention than it gets. 14. Elecampane, the deep lung tonic. Moline helps clear the lungs. Elecampane goes deeper. This is the herb herbalists reached for when somebody had a wet, lingering, stubborn respiratory problem that would not go away. Chronic bronchitis, a deep, productive cough, weak lungs after illness, a chest that never really got clear. Elecampane root was used not as a quick symptom suppressor, but as a longer-term tonic for rebuilding respiratory strength. Its compounds have been linked to cough calming and antimicrobial effects, and traditional use around chronic lung weakness is extensive. That is what makes elecampane special. It is not just trying to stop the cough. It is trying to rebuild the person underneath the cough. It disappeared from common use because it requires patience. Weeks, not minutes. Recovery, not instant suppression. But for deep, old-fashioned herbal respiratory care, elecampane is one of the big names. 15. Toothache plant, the instant numbing herb. This one may be the most dramatic plant on the entire list. Because unlike many herbs that work gradually, toothache plant announces itself immediately. Chew a flower or leaf, and your mouth starts tingling, buzzing, and going numb within seconds. That effect comes from spilanthol, and it made the plant famous for exactly what you would expect: tooth pain, mouth pain, canker, sores, throat irritation, and oral discomfort. It does not solve the root problem, but it can deliver fast, real, natural numbing when you need it. And that is why people have loved it. Toothache plant got forgotten because commercial anesthetic gels took over, but anyone who has ever tried it remembers it. Because it is not subtle, it is like growing a tiny bottle of oral numbing medicine right in your garden. 16. US Nea, the wilderness antibiotic. Technically, US Nea is not a plant, it is a lichen. But I am keeping it in this list because medicinally it earns its place. Usnea hangs from trees like pale green hair, and for wilderness medicine it has a fascinating reputation. It was used topically on wounds and infections because of its strong antimicrobial action. Modern research has looked at US-nic acid and related compounds including activity against certain difficult bacteria. That is a big reason US Nea has captured so much interest among natural first aid and wild medicine communities. Fresh US Nea could be applied as a crude antimicrobial dressing or prepared more effectively as a tincture. Of course, it is slow-growing and needs to be harvested respectfully. Usnea is one of those medicines that feels almost hidden, quiet, overlooked, hanging there in forests while most people walk by without a clue. It is not flashy, but when you learn what it is, the forest starts looking a lot more medicinal. 17. Barberry the ancient antimicrobial. This is the one I teased at the beginning. The plant used for over 2,000 years, and now getting serious modern attention because of how effective its compounds can be. Barberry contains berberine, one of the most studied plant alkaloids in modern natural medicine. Berberine has documented antimicrobial effects, anti-inflammatory effects, digestive applications, and even metabolic benefits in research. That is a huge range. Traditional systems used barberry for digestive infections, inflammatory conditions, liver complaints, and more. Modern science looked at it and instead of disproving the old uses ended up confirming many of them. That is rare. Barberry got pushed aside, partly because the shrub is thorny and inconvenient, and partly because synthetic antibiotics seemed easier. But now, in an age of antibiotic resistance, berberine-containing plants are getting a second look. Barberry is not just an old remedy. It is one of those plants that feels ancient and cutting-edge at the same time. 18. Sea buckthorn, the Himalayan skin healer. Sea buckthorn may be one of the most underrated healing plants in the world. This thorny shrub produces brilliant orange berries packed with unusual oils, antioxidants, vitamins, and omega fatty acids, including omega-7, which is one reason it has become so interesting for skin and mucous membrane health. Traditional medicine systems used it for tissue repair, dryness, and recovery. Modern studies have explored its role in skin barrier function, dry eyes, eczema, mucous membrane irritation, and even postmenopausal dryness. That is a very specific and very valuable niche. Sea buckthorn disappeared from mainstream Western awareness, partly because it grows in harsh, cold, remote environments. But as a plant, it is extraordinary, tough enough to survive, where little else thrives, yet producing berries that seem almost engineered for restoration. It is like a survival plant that became a healing plant, and that is hard not to respect. 19. Sassafras, the fever fighter that taught us caution. Sassafras has a complicated place in medicinal history. For a long time, it was valued for fevers, rheumatic pain, and digestive complaints. Native communities used it. Settlers used it. It even became commercialized through products like root beer. So yes, sassafras really was medicine. But it also teaches an important lesson. Because modern research uncovered safety concerns around safrole, one of its compounds, especially for internal use in significant amounts. That makes sassafras a perfect example of how traditional knowledge and modern safety testing can work together instead of against each other. The old use was real, the value was real, but so is the need for caution. That is why sassafras remains important even if mostly as history now. It reminds us that natural is not the same thing as safe without question, and that is a lesson worth keeping. 20. Meadowsweet, the original aspirin. And here we are at number 20, the plant I saved for last because it ties this whole conversation together beautifully. Meadowsweet. Before aspirin was synthesized, plants like meadowsweet and willow were the source of salicylates, the compounds that inspired one of the most famous drugs in modern medicine. That alone would make meadowsweet important. But here is what makes it really fascinating. Traditional herbalists often used meadowsweet not only for pain and fever, but also for stomach irritation. That is the twist. The synthetic copy became famous, standardized, and cheap. But the original plant often came with a broader, gentler balance. Meadowsweet was used for headaches, fever pain, inflammation, and digestive discomfort. It grew in wet meadows and stream edges, carrying a sweet, fragrant bloom that looked nothing like the role it played. It is the perfect final entry because it shows exactly what happened with so many traditional plants. We isolated one piece, built a drug around it, and forgot the living original. Meadowsweet is the old medicine still growing in the margins, still doing what it always did, still waiting for people to remember. Sometimes the original version really was the masterpiece. If you made it all the way to the end, then you have just seen something most people never stop to consider. Some of the most useful healing plants in the world are not rare, exotic, or locked away in distant jungles. Many of them are common, local, wild, ordinary-looking, and that may be exactly why they were forgotten, because we have been taught to look past what is simple, free, and familiar. So now I want to hear from you. Which plant on this list surprised you the most? Are you team wound healers like plantain, yarrow, calendula, and comfrey team? Respiratory powerhouses like mullein, horehound, boneset, and ella campaign? Or team deeper traditional medicine like barberry, sea, buckthorn, and meadowsweet? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them all, and I love seeing which plants people connect with most.